Hey, good afternoon to you. 506 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Earlier this week, I talked to Senator Ron Johnson yesterday, and I was congratulating him on a really important hearing that he put together, an unofficial congressional hearing earlier this week on Monday, between a bunch of the nation's experts on the subject of health and what is happening to our country, what's going on with medicine, what's going on with food, and why America is so completely unhealthy. Among the witnesses who testified was Dr. Marty Makary, and here's what that sounded like.
As 20% of our nation's kids are on medication, and as you heard, half are obese or overweight. Are they more disobedient than children in Japan? Or have we poisoned the food supply? Is this a chronic disease epidemic that has been a direct result of what adults have done to children? We like to blame people for their diseases, but maybe we need to look inward. We see all these shiny objects thrown at us. Politicians talk about, oh, we've got a new healthcare proposal. Medicare can now negotiate the prices of 10 generic drugs. Don't be fooled. These are things in the periphery. It's not to say they don't have merits, but the proposed program savings in year one, by their own description, is $6 billion. In a $4.5 trillion economy that's expanding at 8% per year in the commercial sector, that's a $200 billion expansion. We save $6 billion. The best way to lower drug costs in the United States are to stop taking drugs we don't need.
Who was the last person you heard say that? What an important contribution to our conversation. He's a professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and Bloomberg School of Public Health, and the author of the new book, Blind Spots, When Medicine Gets It Wrong and What It Means for Our Health. Dr. Marty Makary, great to have you back with us, sir. Thank you very much.
Good to be with you, Vince. Thanks for having me.
It does seem important. And I'll admit, let me confess that this is an issue that I have not thought about that way, and I'm ashamed of it. I saw Tucker Carlson's conversation with Casey and Callie Means recently, and I realized, like, all of our public debates about how much more should we spend on medicine, how much should we cut in Medicaid or Medicare, all of these points would be moot if Americans were healthier, correct?
Yeah, we've developed this giant blind spot in modern medicine. We've done a terrible thing to doctors. We've told doctors, put your head down, focus on billing and coding and seeing patients in short visits, and we're going to measure you, doctors, by your throughput. And so what we have is this whack-a-mole system where we just treat the late stages of diseases, and no one is talking about the big picture. No one is looking at the root causes. And the root causes are right in front of our eyes. We have a poisoned food supply, and these are things we can address. We've got highly engineered food additives, chemicals, and the body is reacting. The gut reacts with an inflammatory reaction. It's a constant inflammation, and it makes people feel sick, and it can make people feel sad too. And so the solution is not more antidepressants and more metformin and more meds. The solution is to address the root causes.
Yeah, and the attitude in America has become that there's always a medicine to solve your problem. COVID's a really perfect expression of this, and few people know this quite as well as you do, Dr. Makary. But I remember when we learned about COVID, and everything we know now, if the government was going to tell us anything, it should have been go out, take a walk, eat healthy, lose some weight, and that's going to do wonders for you. But that's not what they told us, was
it? They could never once mention obesity. The number one modifiable risk factor for COVID death was obesity, which, by the way, is an inflammatory condition, and it's highly addressable. Not a wink, not a word from anyone. Instead, all we heard about was more vaccine doses and take Paxlovid. And Paxlovid, by the way, a study just came out showing zero benefit in low-risk individuals. Zero, none. This was one of the biggest public health campaigns of the last 2 years, from the White House, from Big Pharma was pushing it, FDA. I mean, quite frankly, I couldn't even tell the difference sometimes between what FDA and Pharma was saying. But this was one of the biggest things. And no one would ever talk about our metabolic health, what we eat, our insulin levels, what drives obesity. I really don't think that American children are more disobedient than children in Japan, where obesity is rare. It's pretty clear what's going on in the United States. We have two versions of Fruit Loops made by an American company, Kellogg. One for Canada, where the food chemicals are banned and the colors are not as bright, and one for the United States children. Don't American children deserve the healthier version of Fruit Loops? I mean, these are basic things we can address.
So what role does the government play in this specifically? How does the FDA get involved in this in such a way that Americans are being made more sick?
Well, the main thing we need to do is educate the public. And that's why I wrote the book Blind Spots. I want people to know the truth about so many health topics. The government has been spreading misinformation on the food pyramid. I mean, the food pyramid is maybe the greatest source of misinformation in the modern era. And the issuance of that food pyramid guidance parallels the modern increase in obesity rates. So the main thing we need to do is educate the public. But we also have to take a look at what we're subsidizing. We're subsidizing a lot of the seed oils by driving down the price of corn and soybeans. And we're also allowing chemicals that are banned in other countries to go unchecked. You don't have to provide any studies that chemicals are safe when you add them to the food. In the United States, it's a unique American sort of situation. So there are things the government can do without using its heavy hand of regulation.
You know, on the recommendations, famously, the food pyramid said that you should eat like a ton of bread every day, and most people don't think that's a good idea anymore. The other thing that the FDA recommends, literally to this day, which stunned me, is that up to 10% of your diet can be added sugar. That's a healthy thing. That your sugar intake should be 10% of your daily calories, and that's healthy. That's unbelievable. Yeah, added sugar?
That's what the American Heart Association says. And do you know where they get that from? That kids should have up to 10 grams of sugar a day? They made it up. I mean, they're literally just making stuff up. I mean, there's no basis for this. I mean, how much added sugar should a kid have? Zero. They should have zero. The sugar they should be eating is natural sugar. It's in fruits and vegetables, and it's bound to fiber, and it's not going to kill them. So maybe we need to talk about school lunch programs instead of putting every kid on Ozempic, as they're pushing for now. And maybe we need to treat more diabetes with cooking classes, not just throwing insulin at everybody. We've got to deal with these root causes, and we can do it.
So, Dr. Makary, Dr. Casey Means, I mentioned earlier in the program, Stanford-educated doctor who's now committed her life to the very issues that you're talking about. What she brought up something, which I didn't realize, which is that medical professionals, like doctors, very often receive almost no meaningful training on nutrition when they're in medical school, or at least spend very little time on the subject. Is that true?
That's true, and the key is meaningful, because the 2 hours of nutrition education that a medical student told me they recently got at one of the medical schools in the United States was basically misinformation. It was the old broken food industry stuff. 3 glasses of cow's milk a day, eat bread, never mind the fact that we've stripped it of fiber and it's just sugar. Ignored all these other issues like seed oils and pesticides. So basically, the educational system is broke. And so a lot of us now, a group of doctors, Casey Means is one of them, Peter Attia, myself, we're going directly to the public. Mark Hyman has been doing this. Through podcasts, through books, we're trying to educate people. And guess what? A lot of doctors are getting their nutrition and health education from these sources. I sat next to Casey Means at that hearing that was on at the Senate. Yeah. She had a powerful testimony, and I posted it on Twitter if anybody wants to go see it.
Well, and you mentioned, you've talked about some of the afflictions, the obesity rates sky high, and all of the follow-on illnesses that follow high levels of obesity clearly are the thing that, in terms of the medical system. That's what a lot of that is costing us so much money, the maintenance of that affliction. The other thing that stands out to me is birth rates have been going down pretty dramatically all around the world, but especially in the United States. Fertility problems have run rampant among women. Sperm counts have dropped precipitously among men. How deeply intertwined do you think those issues are to the quality of our food and what's going on with medicine?
Directly. And let me tell you why, Vince, because pesticides, they kill pests. What do you think they're doing to our gut lining of the microbiome, the millions of bacteria normally in the gut that help with digestion and absorption and train the immune system and produce serotonin involved in mood? And so pesticides are known to have hormone-like binding properties. They bind to estrogen receptors. And so, hey, is it a big mystery that the average age of puberty goes down by a week and a half every year? Is this the riddle of the Sphinx? No, it's right in front of our eyes. And I think sometimes we can't use common sense to say, hey, all these chemicals going down the GI tract, they're all new in the modern era where we've seen a rise in GI cancers, like colon cancer going up in young, healthy people under age 50.
Yes.
So we need some common sense. People always ask me, is AI going to fix healthcare? And I tell them, we just need eye.
We just need eye. I like that. Hey, one of the challenges here as we talk about this issue is that, unfortunately, it can get rather expensive to try and clean up your own diet. It's very hard. I was, I've been talking to my wife about this, and just even like shopping for like organic chicken, trying to get the right stuff without all the hormones in it and all the antibiotics. It's expensive. I think she told me last week, she was like, it's like $5 a breast, and that's uncooked. We've got to prepare it. And you start to realize, like, how do we do this? It's really hard for people to afford to break out of this system. At the bigger level, how are we going to have to approach this, Dr. Makary?
Well, we're paying one way or the other. If we're not paying for healthier foods, we're paying for metformin and ICU stays and chronic diseases that are miserable. And people are suffering now. It's like, when kids are smoking cigarettes, they don't see the downsides because they don't think about their long-term health. They're not concerned about dying early. When you're a teenager, tech risk appeals to you. You just don't think about it. So we're trying to educate people. If you want to live longer and feel better, there's a lot of things you can do. And one of them is taking that extra step. Organic really matters, especially when you're eating fruits or vegetables where you're eating the surface. So it may be less important for, say, watermelon when you're not eating the surface, but more important if you're eating strawberries, which the average strawberry is sprayed a dozen times with 7 different pesticides. So it's no longer the attractive fruit that you might think it is if you really understand the facts about how it's being produced.
That's a smart tip. Yeah, if you're eating the surface, that's where it matters the most. All right, Dr. Marty Makary, it's been too long since we've talked. I'm so glad you're back, and I'll chat with you again soon with any luck. Thank you, sir.
Good to be with you, Vince.
That's Dr. Marty Makary, his book, Blind Spots, When Medicine Gets It Wrong and What It Means for Our Health. To the phones we go. Paul calling in from Herndon now, line 3. Hello, Paul. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. How are you?
I'm good, Paul. What's
I wanted to say that about 4.5 months ago, I went to a whole plant-based diet, which, of course, organic is recommended highly, and I agree it's very expensive and often hard to find.
Yeah.
But in 2.5 months, I lost 40 pounds. I'm off blood pressure. I am off my sleep apnea machine, cholesterol medication. My doctor said, no, don't get off of those. That's crazy. All my blood work, my pre-diabetic, I'm a 90 glucose now with a 5.4 A1C in a 5-month period altogether. It is possible to do this by yourself without drugs. Now, I will say it is not easy, and you must be committed.
Yeah.
But what's the alternative? Fat, sick, the last 10 years of your life are miserable.
Yes.
I decided, screw this. I'm going to live my life healthy the best I can. And I'm 60, almost 2. I've never felt better in the last 20 years. and I was about to have some knee surgery. I don't need it anymore. I took
Holy
45
cow.
pounds off my knee. So, I mean, imagine 4 11-pound bowling balls you're carrying around.
How did you have to change? Was portion control an issue, or because of the way you changed your diet, you were like, I feel full, I'm fine?
I absolutely was way overeating because I was only eating healthy things. So I have slowly started to deal with the portion piece of it. Yeah. But when you're eating healthy, you can eat as much as you want.
Well,
how much
well,
calories?
A lot of the unhealthy stuff,
No.
a lot of the unhealthy stuff, as I understand it, has like things in it that are designed to make you eat a lot more of it. You know, that
it's designed to never reach satiability. Correct. I mean, it's not. The rule is, if it's made in a plant, don't eat it. If it's a plant, eat it. If it's in a plant, it's in a box. I'm telling you, it's designed to sit on a shelf for 2 years so they can save money and make a ton of money. And I go into grocery stores now with my eyes wide open. It's killing America. I mean, I feel like I've never been an RFK Jr. guy, but I'm listening to him and I'm like, dear God, this is the gospel right now. He's so right on target.
And this is why
think of these diabetic babies.
Yeah. And this is why they always tell you, like, you're supposed to shop the perimeter of the grocery store. When you go into the grocery store, you just shop the edges, because all the interior aisles are where all the bad stuff happens. But if you work the edges, that's where most of the good stuff is.
Correct. It's a big 7-Eleven unless you're in produce or fresh.
Yeah, how about it? Well, good for you, Paul. That's a great story. Thank you for that. I appreciate that call.
Possible. There's a lot of people out there. Do it. You can do it. Get support. And I tell you one thing, it will test your relationship at home.
I bet. Yeah. You got to be all in together. You got to band together on this. Andy's in Virginia. Let me get him in here real fast. Andy's on line 1. Andy, you're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Vince, hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah,
your guest was spot on. I've been in a family that my mother was one of the first health food nuts in the 60s. Organic food, we don't have the health problems everyone else does. Mm-hmm. What our food processing industry does is they take healthy food and they process it. They take all the vitamins and minerals out of it, and then they add artificially generated vitamins and minerals back in to call it, enriched. So you take wheat, you bromate it, you bleach it, and then you add in all 11 vitamins and minerals and call it enriched. Same with the white bread. Sugar is white death. They take what is, when you have sweet molasses or even brown sugar has some minerals in it that are good for you. But when you take all of that out of the sugar, it's white death. And so they're saying you're supposed to have, 10 grams of sugar a day?
It's just amazing.
You look at all the food on the shelves, the first and second ingredient in half of it is sugar.
Yeah, that's the big problem. Andy, thank you. You're right. The sugar is the problem. Here's one of the reasons I love this topic? I love food. I'm just a big fan of it. And I'd like to eat the good stuff and especially the healthy stuff these days. Hopefully these guys can fix things up. It sounds like Trump wants to. Although he still loves his McDonald's, doesn't he? He really does. Coming up, I got a lot more on what's going on with President Trump as the Iranians are out to get him. Hey, good afternoon to you. 537 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Would appreciate your contribution. Some big news today released by Immigration and Customs Enforcement that there are an unbelievable number of actual convicted murderers among the illegal aliens who are in our country right now. Here's Bill Malugin of the Fox News Channel, among the first, I think the first, to actually break this news today. Take a listen.
According to a letter that the acting director of ICE just sent to Texas Congressman Tony Gonzalez, on ICE's non-detained docket, they're currently tracking 425,000 non-citizens who have been convicted of a crime. Of that number, over 13,000 non-citizens have convictions for homicide and are on the non-detained docket, meaning they're roaming the country right now. On top of that, there are another 15,811 non-citizens convicted of sexual assault who are roaming the country right now on ICE's non-detained docket. It doesn't stop there. Those are convictions. The ICE director also says there are currently just under 1,900 non-citizens on the non-detained docket who have pending homicide charges who are roaming the country, and another 4,250 non-citizens who have pending sexual assault charges who are roaming the country on the non-detained docket. So people's eyes might be glazing over right now with all the numbers we just threw at you. Just to put it in a nutshell right here, what we've learned from the acting ICE director via this letter to Congressman Tony Gonzalez is right now there are over 13,000 illegal aliens convicted of homicide who are roaming the United States.
Yeah, so it is completely out of control. Completely out of control right now. And this is as Kamala Harris is set to be giving remarks at the border today, acting as if she's going to help get control of all of this. It was her administration that enabled what is now officially, I mean, it's been a while. It's an unmitigated disaster. But now we have real numbers on the number of convicted murderers who are in the country, convicted sexual assailants who are in the country, not in custody, free, roaming about the country right now. I just went and checked because I wanted to see if there was much news coverage of it. You know, is the establishment press covering this? The answer, you may not be surprised to find out, is no. No. Donald Trump has spent a lot of time calling these people the enemy of the people. The legacy media, the Democrat-serving media. How else would you describe them if they refuse to cover that story? How many murderers are in our country? Released there by the Biden-Harris administration. How else would you construe them? I don't know, because I just checked. It's just Fox. It's just the Daily Caller. It's just the New York Post. It's the kind of places you would expect to cover this story. But the left-wing establishment media has decided that the ICE director's statement on this subject, not worth covering. It's not like they can challenge it. It didn't come out of Trump's mouth. It's not like they want to, well, there's no proof of that, no evidence. Without evidence, Trump says, no, Biden administration says. A Biden administration official revealed this today. There is zero coverage of this right now. What's the New York Times covering today? Well, they're covering the Middle East. They're covering Israel targets Hezbollah leader. That's the top story. There's some hurricane coverage today. Rightfully so. You can have hurricane coverage. Eric Adams. What else? Maggie Smith, the actress, died. But no indication anywhere here on this website, on their news site, that we have 13,000 murderers running free in the country right now, at least. And nearly 16,000 convicted sexual assailants. So this is, Phil from Fredericksburg called in earlier. He said, Trump's been saying this forever. Trump keeps saying the worst kind of people are pouring into our country. The countries who are letting it happen are laughing at us. They're emptying out their prisons, their insane asylums. These are all things that Trump said. And this is a horrific expression of the truth of that. It really is. Mike is in Springfield. He's on line 2. He's calling in now. Hello, Mike. You're on the Vince Colonnade Show.
Hi, Vince. Thanks for taking my call. I see lots of folks referring to this so-called bipartisan border bill. And it seems to me when you have 5 crossover votes in the House and, 2 in the Senate, that doesn't sound bipartisan to me. So I think we the people need to start a movement, and you can lead it. And that would be unless a measure has a minimum 1/3 of each party voting yay. Both chambers, any measure, is not bipartisan. And whenever a politician or candidate says so, somebody needs to say, with respect, sir, ma'am, that's been debunked.
Yeah, it's a scam. I mean, like if for instance, if Henry Cuellar, as he would from time to time, cross the aisle to support the Republican efforts on the border, the Democrat media would never be like, oh, it was a bipartisan bill. They would never say that. They'd be like, oh, it was a Republican bill, and there may have been 1 or 2 Democrat defections. That's how they would describe it. But that's it. They would never say, oh, it's bipartisan because Henry Cuellar supported the Republicans. It's a scam. And you're right about the so-called, bipartisan border bill. If it was a border bill for anyone, it was Ukraine, Mike, because that bill had $60 billion in funding for Ukraine in it. and just $20 billion for what they referred to as border security. But even that was a joke. They were normalizing all this migration of foreign nationals into the country. They were setting high thresholds before any other emergency measures might actually kick in. They were distributing work permits to people who are here illegally in order to create a magnet for this type of illegal migration. So there is no circumstance where people should have supported this. And even the Border Patrol Union, which, by the way, should not have supported this to begin with, they came out and offered an early endorsement of it merely because of the funding that they were going to get out of it. But they later retracted a lot of their very public support for it by saying, well, we liked the original bill, kind of. We just thought it needed to be amended a lot. Like, in other words, there were a lot of problems with it that needed to be changed. And we were hoping the amendment process would change that. They never talk about any of that, do they, Mike?
They don't. It's time for us citizens. We need to demand more. And one man, as I recall, Tim Russert, I believe, is the person who changed the way we colorize our political maps. Although I think he got the colors backwards. So you, sir, I think you could lead this effort. Let's stop this nonsense about what is bipartisan.
Amen. All right. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. Well, the goal here is always to navigate through the language and try and be as clear about as we can about what's actually happening. And I'd have to go back and check my history on whether it was Tim Russert or someone else, but I believe it was the 1990s, the early 90s, when the major news outlets began using that red-blue distinction between the Republicans and the Democrats, and saying, "Oh, the Republicans are red and the Democrats are blue," and they went and really, of course, that's an effort to try and distance Democrats and the left from the communist impulses within their country, within their party, and because historically we always identified red with the communists, red China, but. Once again, it was like it's just another expression of how to scramble your understanding of events, even little subtle things like colors. How do you color code a map? Well, let's not say the Democrats are red. That'd be a little too on the nose. So let's flip the colors. Yeah, so that's where we are. Speaking of our adversaries, I mentioned Red China. The Iranians, the government keeps telling us, have been interfering in the presidential campaign. This time they're saying it's to hurt Trump and to help Kamala. Merrick Garland today, they were announcing some charges against some Iranians who were involved in hacking and distributing the contents of some private documents within Trump's campaign. And Merrick Garland had this to say today.
The defendants' own words make clear that they were attempting to undermine former President Trump's campaign in advance of the 2024 U.S. presidential election.
So the Iranians are trying to help Kamala get elected. FBI Director Christopher Wray released a video to X in which he said this.
Today's charges represent the culmination of a thorough and long-running FBI investigation that has resulted in the indictment of 3 Iranian nationals for their roles in a wide-ranging hacking campaign sponsored by the government of Iran. These individuals, employees of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, targeted a U.S. political campaign, current and former U.S. officials, and members of the American media, all in an attempt to sow discord and undermine our democracy. These hackers impersonated U.S. government officials, used the fake personas they created to engage in spear phishing, and then exploited their unauthorized access to trick even more people and steal even more confidential information. Last week, the FBI released a statement along with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency.
Can I ask you, do you ever go on guard for the statements that you receive from the intel community these days, including the ones where you're like, well, yeah, of course they want Kamala. The Iranians, it makes perfect sense that the Iranians would want Kamala to win because Biden and Harris have worked aggressively to relieve sanctions on Iran, give them lots of money, enable their terror regime. So yeah, obviously they're working to get Kamala elected and Trump defeated. Trump killed Soleimani. Trump constrained Iran. Trump imposed sanctions on them. Didn't allow them to have money. Kept them from their terror distributions. All those things. So that makes perfect sense. But Isn't it frustrating that we're at a point in American history where the intelligence community is so thoroughly untrustworthy that you still wonder maybe what the second order effort is here? Like, what's behind this? What are they actually doing? What are they up to? And, if you're like a lefty, obedient servant of the government and the authoritarian behavior that has been demonstrating, you probably think this is silly that I'm even raising this. You're like, oh, Vince, come on. It just shows that the FBI is not corrupt at all. The FBI is nonpartisan. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. The Justice Department, which dropped which put all of these charges on Trump in just the last year, clearly to interfere in the election. The Justice Department that has Jack Smith doing that aggressively in court each day. The American justice system, which has gone after Trump. Remember, he was found guilty of defrauding banks that said they weren't defrauded. They didn't lose a cent. They were happy to have done business with Trump. There were no victims, but they gave him the most obscene fine you've ever heard of for a victimless crime. Yeah. And they're imprisoning January 6 people. People went into the Capitol building on January 6 and then keeping them in prison for ungodly lengths of time. And then charging them with the most ridiculous charges you've ever seen. Matthew Graves, the U.S. attorney in D.C., doing that. And things that are now, the United States Supreme Court says, actually, that's unconstitutional, the charges that you leveled against these guys. And sending SWAT teams to the homes of pro-life demonstrators and people singing church hymns outside of abortion mills. Treating Catholics as extremists for celebrating the traditional Latin Mass. Monitoring school board meetings, sending FBI agents to sit in parking lots at school board meetings and write down the license plate numbers of the parents who attend. Yeah, I don't know how I arrived at the conclusion that the Justice Department was hopelessly corrupt. So I hear stuff like this and I'm like, well, good. If this is what's happening, I'm glad you're intercepting it. And thank you for telling us about something, But let me just point out that if this takes some sort of weird turn where we find out that there was some ulterior motive for this expression, I will not be surprised. That's all I'm saying.
Exposing Iran's attempts to steal non-public campaign material from former President Trump's 2024 election campaign. That statement laid bare Iran's attempts to influence our elections and inflame divisions in our society by leaking that information to President Biden's campaign and to the media. Let's be clear what we're talking about here. Attempts by a hostile foreign government to steal campaign information from one presidential candidate and then shop it around both to that candidate's opponent and the media. And while there's no indication that any of the recipients of the stolen campaign information actually replied, Iran's intent was clear.
Yeah, to interfere in our election. Wouldn't be the first time a foreign government has done that. Hillary Clinton was straight up coordinating with foreigners to draft an entire disgusting dossier about Donald Trump, which was then disseminated to the media and used to attempt to stop him from getting in office in the first place and then to stagger his presidency when he was in office. And I love it. It was Hillary Clinton. She was going off on all these. What was it? Recently, she was mad about all of the podcasters who were implicated. The feds came out and they were like, hey, a bunch of podcasters, they didn't know it, but they were receiving money from the Russians. So in other words, they were doing the Russian bidding in the U.S. election. It was crazy. And Hillary Clinton comes out and she condemns all. I can't believe they would do something like that. That's just awful. I was like, what? You're the lady who straight up was coordinating all over the planet, spending donor money to create a complete scam about your political opponent and then lying to the public. She's the woman who's out there saying that people should be imprisoned for spreading disinformation, misinformation. It's very dangerous to our country. I mean, imagine if she actually were to become president of the United States, or let's say the attorney general, God forbid, and have the ability to enforce that she imprisoned people, no matter what your political persuasion. If Hillary Clinton was equally applying the law that she fantasizes about in her head, she'd be in prison. Yeah, All right, I just want to make sure to get a plug in. This weekend, there's going to be a Donald Trump boat parade taking place in the Potomac River. It's going to be awesome. Our very own Corey and Ganamort's going to be there. You should go out and see him. Big Trump flag. It starts at noon on Sunday in Old Town. You'll be able to see it. Either get on the water or just get on the shore and see these guys. Celebrate them. Have a great weekend. The next show is the great one, Mark Levin.